Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, as we come now to the preaching of your word, we ask, O Lord, that you would help us to see glorious things of you. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. We are going to begin Isaiah chapter 60 tonight. And just by way of disclosure at the very beginning, we're not going to get very far into the verses, so you don't need to get too nervous. We're not going to get much past verse 2 tonight. Now, Isaiah 60 is a glorious chapter. And as you read further into the chapter, you see this developed about the glory of the Lord calling the nations, and you have this language that is so parallel to the end of the book of Revelation. Revelation's an intimidating book until you get to about chapter 20, and then chapter 21 and chapter 22 are these glorious chapters about what will be when we will forever be with the Lord on the new heavens and the new earth. And this chapter has a lot to say about that, and we'll get into that in the weeks ahead. But tonight, to pick up on where Dr. Pine ended this morning, I want us to think about enlarging our hearts. You notice that exact phrase was even here in the text. I wish I could claim that we arranged that, but that would be a level of coordination that is beyond me, at least. But you notice in verse 5 it had that, and thy heart shall fear and be enlarged. This idea that Dr. Pine laid before us this morning from Psalm 119 about our hearts being enlarged. And this imagery, which, yes, we had to Google to see about this racehorse. Did he really have a heart 2.5 times bigger? And yes, he really did. The average horse heart, I think the number was 9 pounds, and his was 22 pounds for Secretariat. And that allowed, I assume it was a boy, it was a he? Is that a he? Okay. I don't really know a lot about horses, but it allowed be one of the greatest champions ever. This idea of, what does the heart do? It supplies the strength, the energy, the nutrients, the oxygen, the life that we can go and that we can serve and that we can do. And my intention tonight is to think about, you see the title, Gospel Growth. How is the church, how is the work of ministry accomplished? Where do we put our hopes? Where do we put our trust? What do we do to try and grow the work of the Lord? Now, whether we're thinking about that as a church, or we're thinking about that in our families, or in our individual lives, or all of that together, it's a really important question. Now, I've never seen the movie that the following quote is from, but it is the quote from the movie, and when I give you the title of the movie, I bet you know the quote. The movie is The Field of Dreams. Do you know the quote that I'm going after?
If you build it, they will come.
Build it, they will come. I have no idea what the movie is really about, except some guy building baseball fields and playing baseball with people, I don't know. But anyways, a lot of people adopt that strategy in ministry. They say, it's up to us, it's up to our efforts, and so we'll build a big building, or we'll have grandiose events, or we'll just do things to just draw people and attract people in, and then won't that just be so wonderful? Build the biggest, most beautiful building, and maybe people will come. Have the biggest, grandest events. It's interesting that around 2006, 2007, some of the what's called seeker-sensitive churches, they started doing investigation on their memberships. And they discovered that, yes, they had a lot of people, but very little depth. Very little discipleship was happening. Very little enduring commitment was happening. And around that time, somebody came up with the quote, what you win them with, you win them to. The idea being what you brought them in with, that's what you'll keep them with. So a fun example is a pizza party. If we threw a big, huge pizza party, we might be able to get people to come to that. But then we'd have to serve pizza all the time. Now, I'm not against pizza parties. I like pizza parties. We usually have one every summer at the end of Vacation Bible School. There's nothing wrong with a pizza party. But if the pizza is all there is, that's where the problem comes in. If we're depending solely and entirely on what we can do creatively and what we can do through our own efforts, we're going to be in despair pretty quick. We're going to be exhausted very quick. We're going to come to the end of ourselves very quickly. You know, I know that we love to see people come to church. We love to meet new people. We have people like a couple this morning. They were here on vacation, and it's still a great time of fellowship and encouragement. And we might wonder, are we having any sort of impact? Or what can we accomplish? How can we bring more people in? And certainly that there is a means that Christ has given to us. And that means is the declaration of the gospel. There's the one idea of let's just attract them and do it in our efforts. And then the other option, the other way that we might enlarge our hearts and encourage ourselves and have that strength and that endurance for ministry is to look to the greatness of God. That as we look into His Word, we enlarge our hearts through the work of the Spirit, not with what we can do or have done, but with who He is. And our passage tonight points to that glory, to the hope of the church, to the growth of the church, being dependent on our great and awesome God. Now, as we look at this, the first thing I'd like us to see in verse 1 is the dawning of God's glory. You have this imagery in verse 1. You have, arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. That this is the imagery of the sun rising, of the sun coming up. Did anybody watch the sunrise this morning? You might not know this. It happens every day, apparently. It comes up every day.
Too cloudy this morning.
Oh, too cloudy this morning. I wasn't looking outside. I don't know what time sunrise was this morning. But the sun rising, and that's the start of a new day. It's the start of a new work day. And the picture here is it's God's glory. The very last class that I ever took at Western Reformed Seminary was a class, it was actually two classes shoved into 1 week called Evangelism and Discipleship. They were each a 1-credit course. And I'm nervous talking about this because the professor is sitting right in front of John, the 5th pew back. And so it was a class, it was the final class that I took in all of seminary, and I was there with another student who was also graduating, a couple other, I think, 2nd, 3rd year students. And the professor asked us a question. What is the glory of God? Now, we're seminary students about to graduate. We should know that answer, right? The glory of God is this concept that we all sort of talk about all the time. We say we need to glorify God. That's our chief end. We talk about the glory of God. But what is it? And we all the students sort of nervously shuffled in our seats. Kind of like we did yesterday when he asked, what does it mean to sing with grace in your hearts? Remember how you felt then? That's how we all felt. And at least in my mind, the way I remember it, I don't know if you even remember this at all, Dr. Pine, but is I muttered out, well, it's something along the lines, this is the perfection of his person. Right? You remember that?
Vaguely.
Yeah. You know, well, I was thinking to myself, am I going to graduate if I don't get this correct? This is really nerve-wracking. But that's the idea, though, is who is he? What is his person? What is his character? What are his qualities? And I've talked about that before. I expanded on it because Dr. Pine was here for his sake to show that I remember something that That was actually the only 2 classes I took from him. I didn't take homiletics from him, so it's not his fault. But the idea, the wisdom, the power, the goodness, the holiness, the truth, the fact that he is a spirit, infinite and eternal and unchangeable, and all those things, that he is the God who is omnipotent. He is the God that has all knowledge. He knows all things. He is the God who is all wise. And I like to challenge us that when we go through trials, not just to think about the knowledge of God and the power of God, but also the wisdom of God. That's what he has deemed best. That difficulty, that suffering, that hardship is for some purpose. Romans 8:28, which is such a precious verse to us, that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. That verse can only be true because of how great and awesome our God is. Because of his knowledge. Because he knows the beginning from the end. We all like to think we know how long our lives are going to be. Right? We're all going to live to be 120. Right? Seems like a good idea to me now, but some of us think that, and by reason of strength, we understand we're at the end. Some of us think we're at the beginning. But it's sobering to be reminded that we don't know. We don't know how long we have. But God does. We look at and look forward to the things that we even read about later particularly, but even in the verses read tonight, these wondrous things of people coming, of the nations bringing their camels. Where is it? Yeah, verse 6. And then that word that I'm not going to try and pronounce that starts with a D, that just means young camels. So camels and young camels are all coming, and that's a sign of the abundance and people bringing their strength, their talents to the house of the Lord, to serve the Lord. What a joy. How can that possibly be? Certainly we're not going to accomplish it in our strength, but the glory of the Lord can do it. Have you ever been in total and complete darkness? Ever been just someplace? It's really hard to, if you walk outside our building, right? We have wonderful lighting on the outside of the building that Kevin has spent a lot of time making sure works and comes on at the right time. And so if you go outside our building, you're never actually in darkness, right? Yeah, we've got street lights and stuff. But have you ever been somewhere truly in complete and total darkness? Some of you have. In my house where I grew up, there was one closet in the middle of the house that was completely and totally dark. It was also we had a coat closet, like all the jackets were in there. I'm not sure why. We lived in Florida, but you'd go in there, and we never used that closet. It always smelled really clean in there, but it was completely dark, and there wasn't a lot to do. Of course, it was a very small closet. In my life, I've only truly been in the dark a couple of times. One, I was too young. I was at a cabin in Colorado, a family cabin that was primitive, no running water, so certainly didn't have electricity, and it got pretty dark at night. And the other time is I was at a winter retreat with the Tacoma Church, which oddly enough I think Dr. Pine was at too. His wife remembers, he doesn't, but we were there, and it was out in the mountains of Washington, and it was while we were there, like 4 or 5 feet of snow fell while we were there, and a tree fell in the woods and knocked down the power line. He remembers now, and we were out of power all day. Now their heat thankfully was gas, and so we had heat, and we could do everything we wanted to do on that day with the young people until it got dark outside. It was pitch black outside, and the fire was giving some light, but we couldn't do anything. I mean, I suppose we could have done something, but it probably would have been a bad idea with a bunch of teenagers, let them run around in the dark. What could go wrong? I think the question becomes, what could go right? Right? Why is that? Well, because we need light. Light is so important. As the church, this verse is reminding us that it is the glory of God that is our light. It is the majesty of his person. It is the perfection of who he is and even what he's revealed to us in the Word of God that is our light. Because what do we have in ourselves? Well, verse 2 tells us that, for behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness to the people. That darkness covers the whole earth. It doesn't matter who you are, or where you're from, or what you've done. In and of ourselves, we cannot escape the darkness. That phrase, gross darkness, is the idea of a heavy cloud of darkness. Have you ever been in dense fog? I'm trying to think if I have. I don't really remember, but it's not something we experience here so much. But that idea of a heavy cloud coming down and you can't see in front of you. You can't do anything. Without some sort of light assistance, you're not going anywhere. It's not safe. The visibility is virtually nothing. He says that we, in and of ourselves, are in a heavy cloud of darkness. Think about it. Think about the knowledge of people. Science teaches us to run experiments, right? The scientific method is this idea that you have a hypothesis and then you design an experiment that only has one variable, and then you test and see if you're right. And you're either right or you're wrong. And no matter what, you learn something and you keep sort of working on it. You keep sort of testing it out. And over time, people have learned that we used to have some really bad ideas. Like at one time, there was a sense and a belief in a sort of a spontaneous creation. That food got moldy just because, well, it popped up there. And then somebody ran an experiment with a vacuum-sealed environment, and discovered, no, that's not actually the case. But for a long time, they thought that. And there's been many other areas, and we've sort of all experienced that the last couple of years. What's the best way to handle this or that? It's been a rapid change of things. Likewise, in spiritual things, men in and of themselves have wrong reason. Every once in a while, you run into somebody that believes that God has spoken directly to them, that they're getting direct revelation from God. Last week we talked about the work of the Spirit. And certainly, when I say that, I'm not talking about a scripture passage sort of popping in your brain and you're remembering it and thinking about it. But people believe that God directly spoke to them. And sometimes they believe with detailed instructions, kind of like God did to Noah. God came to Noah and said, you're going to build this and you're going to do this and you're going to trust me. And that's what Noah did. I didn't tell Micah I was going to say this, but it'd kind of be nice to know that if in 25 years Micah would be a missionary to Russia. And if we knew that, what would we start doing with Micah tomorrow? We'd start learning Russian and eating Russian dressing all the time, right? And get him acclimated to life in Russia. Make him sleep in the refrigerator or something. I think it's cold there. But, and teaching him that. And that would be sort of nice. You've got 25 years to learn Russian, son. It'll work out fine, right? And we like to think, wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that be, if you had the playbook? I'll never forget I don't remember, I guess it was the day before I was installed in Scappoose, Oregon. Dr. Anderson, Pastor Bob Anderson, sent me an email and it was encouraging me about, he couldn't be there. And he said, if when I'd started ministry, the Lord had told me everything that had happened to me, I probably wouldn't have started. But I did. and he was always faithful. If you look at your life that way, if you knew everything that was going to happen, every trial, every difficulty, you'd probably be afraid to get out of bed. Because that knowledge isn't for us, but it's for the Lord. And we're called to trust and obey each and every day. We don't depend upon our own reason. You know, another element of the darkness of humanity is our own weakness. How many of you were taught in school what goes up must come down? Were you taught that? And that's a science experiment I've been testing my whole life. I throw things up, and I might have to wait for a little bit, but what happens invariably? It comes down. And I can run this test all day, every day, and everything I throw up, everything that I launch into the air is going to do what? It's going to come down. Because, why? Because I'm just too weak to, number one, throw it high enough, and number two, build something that can withstand leaving, right? Because we've launched things into the cosmos. I hope that's the right term, Abby. Tell me later. But we've launched things to outer space that are never coming back to Earth with enough rocket fuel and with enough design ingenuity behind it. We're never getting those things back. You see, we often think we know what can be done, but then we're just depending on our own efforts, and we're often wrong. You know, when you think about the early church, and you think about the collection of men that Christ entrusted the church to, right? Jesus, his death, burial, and resurrection, and then his ascension, and who does he leave behind to be the leaders in the church? He leaves behind a group of men that, what kind of track record do they have through the Gospels? What kind of track record did they have on the night that he was betrayed? What kind of track record did they have even after he was risen? The end of the Gospel of John, what do you find a group of them doing? They go fishing again. And I feel a kinship with them. They never catch anything in any record of them fishing in the Bible. Now, they had been given a task by Christ, and instead of doing that task, they went fishing. There's nothing wrong with fishing, Dr. Blizzard. You don't need to yell at me later. But those guys were going back to their old way of life instead of walking with Jesus, instead of doing the work that he gave them to do. And yet, we work our way through the book of Acts, and what do we read about these men? They turned the world upside down. The gospel went far and wide. These men that once were afraid to witness to a servant girl are now witnessing to the Sanhedrin and to the highest courts in the empire, willing to give their lives for the cause of Christ. Their numbers were small, but their God was great. We get so trapped in the numbers game, and we forget that there are more with us than with them. Always. No matter where you're at, the Lord has promised to never leave you nor forsake you. Through every trial, through every difficulty, through every hostile environment that you enter into, the Lord has promised to be with you. And in that way, he calls us at the end of verse 2, because the darkness that's in the world, so we're not depending on who we are and what we can do, but we're looking to the glory of God which is rising. And he says, and the Lord shall rise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. That the call to action here is in the light of God's glory. That his glory is seen upon us. We are the light of this world, Jesus said, but as the moon is the light of the night. Right? The moon in and of itself does not glow. It doesn't burn. It doesn't produce any light. But what does it do? It acts as a big, huge mirror that sheds light on this world. so that when God's glory is upon us, when we by faith are trusting and walking in the Lord and hoping in His glory, and our hearts are enlarged according to His word, and as we have that honor and respect and love and joy that is fearing Him, that there is a glory shined upon the world. When I was at community college, the psychology professor had a kind of a fun theory about why full moons, people think crazy people come out in full moons. His theory, they do, right? His theory was, it's because it's the only time you could see the crazy people. Otherwise, it was completely dark, you couldn't see them. But could it also have been that sort of it's gotten into our mental image, but also could it have just been because they could go be crazy in the dark? Because a full moon does what? It lets you be able to see and act and do things. It exposes, if you will, their works of darkness. And beloved, in that way, we're to be the light of the world. We're to hold up a standard of God's love and God's righteousness and God's truth and God's character, which does shine light on the fact that not everybody loves the Lord our God. Not everyone is seeking to serve Him. But also providing, I trust, not a holier than thou, but a light of hope. Maybe a different light we can think of for a moment is a lighthouse that provides direction and hope and warning about the rocks and the dangers and where the safe harbor is. You and I are to reflect God's glory in our lives, not as perfect people who have it all figured out. Because let's just be honest, that doesn't describe any of us. We are people that are broken, that are weak, that are sinners, that have come short of the glory of God. And our only hope is a salvation that Christ has provided. That if our lives are together, all the glory goes to Christ. If our hearts have been healed, all the glory goes to Christ. If we're busy about our Father's business, all the glory goes to Christ and His greatness. God's glory is our light, which brings others to see the glory of God. Our privilege as the light of the world is simply to point people to Christ and to His glory. So, 3 things. The glory of His power overcomes our weakness. We're weak, but He is strong. And in our weakness, His strength is made perfect. The treasures of His wisdom overcomes our folly. I don't know about you, but I'm so glad to have the Word of God as our guide. We don't have to wonder about what somebody might imagine is the right thing to do. We don't have to seek some spiritual guide in the world and try and discern between the different people that are out there. We have a rule of faith and practice in the Word of God. We have the touchstone. We have to come back to. Now, some of it's tough to understand. And so, yes, we look to men and those of the past, those current spiritual guides, wise men and women in our lives that can help us understand the Word of God. But if somebody says something crazy, we can always bring it back to the Word of God. In the Old Testament, there were 2 tests for a prophet. One, that what he said came true. But 2, that no matter, even if he predicted something that comes true, if he leads you to another God, he's to be rejected. Because the Word of God in His revelation is the standard. And then thirdly, the glory of His presence overwhelms our enemies. We live in a difficult time. That's not unique to 2022. The church, The people of God, since the fall, have lived in a difficult time. And our hope is in the God who has promised to be with us. So may we rest and trust and hope. May our hearts be enlarged to serve him, looking to his greatness and to his glory. Let's pray. Heavenly